Native Instruments has just released the third iteration of its S-Series keyboards. I will suggest why you might want to buy one. I will mention a couple of things which no review to date has even mentioned. I will talk about price, and I will tell you why I'm not going to upgrade from my existing Mark II keyboard to the Mark III version. If that sounds good, let's get going. Now, as there is already so much information already out there in terms of reviews and from Native Instruments themselves, I'm going to try very hard not to cover existing ground. So I do assume a nodding acquaintance of Native Instruments and what they do and Komplete Kontrol and what it does. Now, if you're a bit vague about that, I do have some videos in the description which you may find helpful. However, I'm sure you can pick up the gist of it from Native Instruments themselves and from the reviews. But I don't want to cover existing ground. So being as brief as I think I possibly can be, the S-Series of keyboards are Midi Controller keyboards. They don't make any sounds themselves. They are designed to work specifically with Native Instruments Komplete Kontrol. They can also be used as general MIDI controllers with general MIDI gear and music software. However, their strength undoubtedly lies in their close integration with Komplete Kontrol. The S-Series comes in three versions: the S49 with a synth action keyboard, the S61 with a semi-weighted action keyboard, and the biggie, the S88 with a fully weighted hammer action keyboard. Functionally, however, they are identical. Now, even if you are not on Native Instruments mailing list, if you subscribe to a few YouTube music review channels, when you see half a dozen videos appearing at exactly the same time, you know this is a new product. So at the time of making this video, I think there were about 5 or 6 reviews already out there from the channels that I subscribe to at any rate. So I've watched all of them. Native Instruments also has a very interesting and informative video about the new features in the Mark III keyboards. So if you are in any way remotely interested in these keyboards, I would definitely recommend you check out the reviews and Native Instruments overview. So the main feature of all the S-Series keyboards, whatever version, is that they integrate very closely to Komplete Kontrol. This is a VST plugin. It acts as a shell for other synthesizers, NKS compatible synthesizers. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. But essentially, within Komplete Kontrol, you have a list of all your synthesizers and, more to the point, all the presets. And even more to that point, the presets are categorized and tagged by type and characteristic. So it makes it really easy to sort through however many tens of thousands of presets you have. On top of that, it integrates superbly well with the keyboard. You can use the keyboard to select instruments, to select presets, and essentially control Komplete Kontrol from the keyboard. And that is a way of working that many people find very, very intuitive and very useful. Now, in addition to being able to select presets from the keyboard, and you can select them on screen as well, of course, but when you select a preset, the most common and popular parameters of that instrument are automatically mapped to the keyboard. In the case of the S-Series, to a series of 8 rotary endless encoders. So this gives you sort of hands-on hardware control of a software instrument. Now, the controls which are mapped will vary from instrument to instrument, but in the case of a synthesizer, they are likely to be cut-off resonance. You might be able to adjust the reverb time or the delay feedback parameter, for example. Now, obviously, most synthesizers have more than 8 parameters, so on the keyboard you can step through a series of pages in blocks of 8. Some synthesizers have numerous pages, 6, 10, even more. So stepping through these, yes, you can do it. Personally, I don't find that particularly intuitive. However, whenever I load a preset, I normally reach for the encoders to twiddle and tweak to see what other sounds I can immediately get out of it. This is very interesting, very fun, and very practical. So if a piece of software is NKS compatible, it will load up into Komplete Kontrol and have the same set of integrated features that Native Instruments have. An increasing number of software developers are making their instruments NKS compatible. And even if you are not fully on board with the NI ecosystem, the chances are you already have many synthesizers which are NKS compatible. Now, Komplete Kontrol is totally free. You also get a few native instruments bundled with that. So if you want to see how useful Komplete Kontrol can be, there's a very good chance you get to try it with your existing instruments for absolutely no charge at all. Now, there are a couple of really neat new features on the Mark III versions of the keyboard. The first and the most obvious one is that it supports polyphonic aftertouch. This is a really great performance feature and generally something to beat to side. I actually don't have any existing keyboards which support polyphonic aftertouch, although I do have many software synthesizers which do. Another great feature of the Mark IIIs is an improvement in build quality, and they also have a larger LED display. One other interesting addition which might appeal to people who use sample libraries is that the keyboard now supports direct control of Contact, which is Native Instruments sample player. Now, you could always access a Contact, although only when it was running within Komplete Kontrol. Now you can put Contact on its own track and the keyboard will let you control Contact and the instruments within it from the keyboard itself. So that's a nice addition. Now, there are lots of other feature enhancements and improvements, but looking at them and listening to the reviews, I don't think these are absolutely major improvements. From a software point of view, I would say the new features and the enhancements probably jump from a version 2 to a 2.1 or a 2.2, maybe a 2.3 on a good day. Now, you don't do that with hardware, of course. We've gone from version 2 to version 3, but just looking at the additions and the enhancements, now, to me, I just don't see they are such a massive improvement, certainly not enough for me to want to buy one, and I shall explain a couple of reasons why that is. Now, this is supposed to be a MIDI controller. Well, in fact, it is a MIDI controller, but it lacks two things which I think most people would naturally expect to find on a MIDI controller. First of all, it doesn't have any drum pads. Why is that? Well, of course, Native Instruments has their own drum pad controller machine, so they don't want to encourage people to not use machine. If you really want drum pads, they want you to buy machine as well. So I would be very, very surprised if Native Instruments actually releases at any time a keyboard with drum pads. I don't think we will ever see that. But the other thing, and this is a sort of a killer point for me, it's a MIDI controller without any faders. Now, I think most MIDI controllers, well, certainly at this price range, have faders. Now, this was an amazing surprise to me when I first saw the Mark III versions. I thought, where are the faders? I really thought that when Native Instruments released a new version of the S-Series keyboards, it would have faders, but no, it doesn't. You have to control everything with these 8 rotary controllers. Now, faders are incredibly useful for certain music functions, not least of all mixing. Now, you can mix with the rotary controllers. There's a mix button on the keyboard. You press that and you can mix up to 8 channels at a time. Now, I've tried mixing with these rotary controllers on a few occasions and I just really didn't find them very intuitive, not very inspiring. They didn't make me want to tweak mixes at all. They're fine for setting volume levels, but if you want to just volume as you are mixing a piece, switch on the automation, do a mix. I just really couldn't get away with these rotary encoders. There is a reason why studio desks use faders and not rotary encoders. On top of that, if you are performing a piece of music, particularly with sample libraries, particularly with orchestral instruments, I think faders are very useful for adjusting volume, for example, and particularly expression when you are recording a music line. Now I know many instruments map expression to the mod wheel, and that's what I tend to use if that's available. But if you have a volume fader and an expression fader side by side, you can use them simultaneously while recording a piece of music. And of course, being able to control other MIDI parameters from faders can be just as useful. So I was really disappointed to find that the new keyboard doesn't have any faders. I suspect this will disappoint an awful lot of people as well. Interestingly, not one of the reviews I have seen so far mentioned the lack of faders. One other thing which may be important to you if you use Machine, the Mark II version of the keyboard had a set of buttons which integrated with Machine. They have been removed from the Mark III version. Native Instruments said that not many people use them. Now I've no idea how many people not many people is, but I suspect there will be hundreds, if not indeed thousands of people who did use them and who will be disappointed to find that they are not on the Mark III version. I'm just going to mention one other thing, and that is the touch strip. Now they have moved it in the Mark II version. It was below the pitch bend and mod wheels. It was a terrible design decision. When you were using the wheels, you would almost certainly touch the touch strip, and this could result in the volume just disappearing or activating some sort of parameter which you didn't want activated. Even just using the keyboard, if you were down the lower end of the keyboard, it was very easy just to knock the touch strip. So they have now moved the touch strip to above the pitch and mod wheels. However, I think there is a missed opportunity here. I think they could have expanded the touch strip and put it along the length of the keyboard, or certainly a good way across the keyboard. Now, one of Vangelis's favourite instruments, if not his most favourite instrument, was the Yamaha CS80. This had polyphonic aftertouch and a ribbon controller, and for him this combination of performance controls made the instrument extremely expressive. I'm not aware of many keyboards which actually have a ribbon controller. I just think this is a missed opportunity, not a deal breaker perhaps, but a missed opportunity by Native Instruments. So let's mention something else which I haven't seen mentioned in any review so far, and that is price. Now, I have said in other videos that you read a review to find out what the opinion of the reviewer is about a piece of gear, and you really have to put this in context as to how much it costs. If you just want to find out the functionality of an instrument, you can probably download the manual or watch a tutorial. To me, that is not the essence of a review, and I think a review which doesn't mention price in some way, shape or form is only doing half the job. It's all very well saying an instrument has a massive set of features and functionality, or even a limited set of features and functionality, but you really need to put this into context with how much it costs and what else is available on the market. So here are the prices on the Native Instruments website. I'll concentrate on the S49 so we can do a quick comparison with the least expensive of these keyboards. And at the moment, the S49 is 649 Great British pounds. In America, it's available on Sweetwater at 749. So as usual, the Brits are being charged over the odds, certainly compared to the American price. It's not as bad a differential as some instruments, so we'll say that's in the ballpark. But 650 quid, is that good value for a MIDI controller without faders? Well, I think Native Instruments are trying to position this more as a Komplete Kontrol controller rather than a MIDI controller. I think the idea is they expect you to buy this to control Komplete Kontrol and not as a general MIDI controller, although of course you can use it as a MIDI controller, but without faders. So I said, or at least I think I said, I would suggest some alternatives. Now, if you are interested in the Native Instruments ecosystem, you might want to consider buying a Mark II version. These are currently selling for around 350 Great British pounds, a touch more than half the price of a Mark III. So you lose the polyphonic aftertouch and a few other bits and bobs, but if price is important to you, it is certainly, I think, worth considering. If you want to save even more money, my guess is that the Native Instruments fanboys will be putting their Mark IIs on the second-hand market in order to buy a Mark III. So if you are happy with a Mark II, you could probably save even more money if you were to buy a second-hand one. Now, although we've been talking about the Native Instruments ecosystem and Komplete Kontrol, an NKS instrument will run in Komplete Kontrol, and you can control this from the screen. You don't need a dedicated keyboard to do any of this, so it's quite possible to use any other MIDI controller but without the integrated functionality that the keyboards have. So if we look at what is probably one of the closest competitors, is probably Arturia's Keylab series. So again, looking at the 49 key version, this is €499 on the Arturia website. You may well pay less at a retailer. Now, I don't think this has polyphonic aftertouch. It does have faders and it does have a drum pad. This is a proper MIDI controller. And being by Arturia, it will automatically map Arturia instruments to the keyboard in the same way that the Native Instruments keyboard maps Komplete Kontrol instruments. Now, the Arturia instruments are also NKS compatible, so you probably wouldn't need both keyboards, but if you really wanted faders and a drum pad and a good all-round MIDI controller, then I think the series are well worth looking at. I will just say one thing about these though. Arturia does two versions. They do what I think is a pro version, but they also do an essentials version. Now, a couple of years ago, I was in a music shop and I tried one of the essential keyboards. And the best thing I can say about it is I really didn't like the feel of the keys. The keyboard was absolutely terrible. What can I say? Sorry, Arturia. I do love your gear, but this is, at least the one I tried, was really very, very bad. I just really couldn't use it. I wouldn't want it. But the Pro version does have a good keyboard. Well worth checking out. So there are a few options for you. Yes, absolutely, by all means, buy the new Mark III version if you want to get into the Native Instruments ecosystem. But there are alternatives and cheaper alternatives, and also alternatives who like the idea of Komplete Kontrol but don't necessarily want to buy into the entire Native Instruments ecosystem. Now, as you may have gathered, I am not upgrading to a Mark III version. So just another point on polyphonic aftertouch. Whenever an instrument is released with polyphonic aftertouch, people tend to think, oh wow, you know, isn't this fantastic? But polyphonic aftertouch has been around for decades. It's nothing new. The Yamaha CS80, back whenever that was released, that had polyphonic aftertouch. It was way ahead of its time. But now manufacturers are still releasing instruments without any aftertouch at all. That's sort of criminal, I think. Yes, I'm looking at you, Korg, and the Prologue. Yes, I'm looking at you, Roland, and the System 8. This really doesn't make sense. It can only be a penny-pinching attitude towards synth design. As an example, I would hold up the ASM Hybrid Explorer, which in the UK is currently around about 500 Great British pounds. This is a synthesizer with a polyphonic aftertouch keyboard, and for 500 quid you get the polyphonic aftertouch keyboard and the hybrid synth as well. So when you look at that, I think you look at the price of some other bits of gear. Yes, and I'm going to include the S-Series Mark III in that. It does start to look a little bit expensive, but that's the cost of entry into the Native Instruments ecosystem. So I hope you found this helpful in making a decision which is right for you. If you're still on the fence about it, which I totally understand because it is not an inconsiderable investment, I think you might find these videos helpful. As always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you again soon in the next video.